So we're going to come down onto our backs, have a block close by. If you do have two blocks, you might have one of the blocks off to the front of your mat. You may want it for some of the poses, but we don't need it right away. So go ahead and come onto your back. And we'll start with the feet on the floor. So feet wider than your hips so that when you drop the knees in, you can allow the knees to rest together so that you don't have to use any muscles in the legs to keep the legs up. So just allow the knees to drop in towards each other. Shifting so that you have a balance of weight on each side of your hip, each sides of the shoulder blade, tucking the chin towards your throat, creating length in the back of your neck. Broaden across the collarbones, the rib cage is drawing slightly in and down towards the hips. So resisting that flaring of the ribs open, and just have some awareness of balance between the front and the back of the rib cage, so that as you breathe deeply, you can feel the sides of your rib cage expand outward evenly. And as you exhale, you can feel the softening, the relaxing of the ribs in. Just take a moment to connect to your breath, feeling the inhalations in and out through your nose. And as a inspiration for today's practice, here's a quote from Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So it is that courage to step into our lightness, to release the fears that hold us back, that allow us to shine bright and find the inner courage. And slowly walk your heels in line with your sit bones. Take your block and allow your knees to open and place the block right on the pubic bone. And then squeeze the block between your thighs. So we're going back to this use of the block to find the strength of and the engagement of the inner thigh muscles. These are the adductor muscles, so the muscles that add the legs towards the midline. So start to squeeze the inner thigh muscles together into the block. Keeping your pelvis in neutral, so the hip points point straight forward, keeping the lower rib cage drawing in and down towards the tops of your hips. Inhale, expand the lungs out into the sides of the ribs. And as you exhale, lift the knees above your hips. Shins parallel to the floor, ankles flexed, so toes pointing up towards the sky. Take your fingertips and place them right at your knees, so that you're kind of holding the legs, the knees, joints right above the hip sockets. So allow your elbows to straighten so that your fingers are just kind of dangling your knees. Take a few breaths here, Continuing to breathe in and out through the nose, expanding the diaphragm with each inhalation, softening the diaphragm with each exhalation. And as you breathe, start to sense the leg bone, the top thigh bone. So it's this straight bone that attaches to our pelvis. And where it attaches to the pelvis is in the hip socket. And this is a ball and socket joint. So it has lots of muscles that hold the ball in the socket. And sometimes what causes some aches and pains in our hips and our low back and our knees is when these muscles kind of overpower other muscles. And it's a balance of these muscles that creates more stability in the hip joint. So squeeze in to the block a little bit more. And then allow your hands to come down by the side. Continue to squeeze and start to take the outer edges of your feet out. So the lower leg bone is moving out. And as you take the feet out, notice what happens to the tops of the legs bones. They start to squeeze in towards the block and roll down towards the back body. So take the feet out a little bit more and notice what's going on in your inner thighs as you take the feet out. And then bring the heels together and notice what happens to the leg bones. And just do this a couple of times. So taking the outer edges of the feet out, leg bones, upper leg bones roll in and back. And as you take the heels in, leg bones roll out. So sensing the rotation of that ball, the head of the femur, inside the hip socket. Sensing how the muscles of the inner thigh engage to create that motion. And then bring the feet back to neutral, remove the block, hug the knees in towards the chest. Bring the knees out, down, in, and up. So do that a few times. And as you move, kind of like you're stirring the pot, feel again, the head of the femur. It's that awareness of finding the movement inside the socket that will carry throughout this class. Bring the knees in, arms out to the side, T to the body. Shift your left leg down a bit and then cross your right thigh over your left thigh. Wrap your right foot around the back of the left calf if you're able to. And then start to squeeze the inner thighs as if that block was there. So squeezing it and rolling it down. At the same time, start to press your knees out into each other, which feels like you're pressing them in because they're together, but you're pressing your knees out. And as you press your knees out, notice what starts to happen on the outside of your hips. Keep that awareness and then cross left arm underneath your right arm and bring the fingertips up into the palm of your hand. Tuck your chin towards your chest. Inhale, expand your ribs out. And as you exhale, crunch up. So you're creating a little sit up. As you inhale, take your head down, take your heels towards the floor. Keep squeezing inner thighs, rolling down and in. Keep pushing the knees out into each other. And as you exhale, crunch up again. Inhale, head down, heels towards the floor. Exhale, crunch up. 2 more times. Keep finding as you crunch up that inner thigh rolling in and down, outer knees pressing out into each other. Last time you crunch up, hold. Release head down, release heels down, unwrap the legs, bring the feet to the floor, and windshield wiper knees side to side. And come back to center. Bring the knees above your hips. Shift your right leg down slightly, and then cross left thigh over right thigh. Take your left foot behind your calf if you can. Start to squeeze your inner thighs together, rolling the leg bones down and in. Start to press your knees out into each other and feel what happens on the outside of your hips as you press the knees out. Arms wide, and then cross right arm under left, wrapping fingertips into the palm of your left hand. Keep your chin tucked towards your throat. Inhale, expand the lungs out towards the ribs. And as you exhale, crunch up, bringing your elbows and your knees towards each other. Inhale, lower your head, heels towards the ground. Exhale, crunch up. As you crunch up, roll the inner thighs down and in, knees press out. Inhale, lower down. Exhale, crunch up. 2 more times. Keeping that awareness of your inner thighs, squeezing in towards each other and rolling down as you crunch up, and your knees pressing out. Next time you crunch up, stay up. Keep that awareness of your legs. And then release. Release your knees. Grab your knees with both hands. Pull your knees towards the chest. And then take the knees down, keeping them together. Open the legs. Bring the knees up towards your armpits. And then come in and do this circle in this direction a couple of times. Again, keeping that focus of where you feel the leg bones inside the hip sockets, kind of rolling all around the hip socket. Hug the knees in towards the chest, grab behind the knees and roll up. Cross your ankles, take your block, come to hands and knees, and we'll go back to block between the thighs. So bring the block as high up between your thighs as you can. Tuck your toes under and bring your hands to the floor, shoulders below your or above your wrist. Spread your fingers wide, first fingers parallel. Squeeze into the block and roll the inner thighs down. Imagine the knees slightly pressing out as if they were pressing into each other like you just felt, and pull the outer hips back. Shift your weight into your right hand and bring your left hand to touch your right shoulder. As you do, notice where the weight goes on your right knee or your left knee. You may feel as you lift the hand off, more of the weight shifted into your left knee. Notice if the hip pops out. So this is what we're going to work with today. So sometimes when we bring the weight more onto one leg, the hip pops out. See if you can pull the hip in, keeping the leg bone, the top leg bone, straight in the hip. Take the right hand down and then touch left hand down. Touch your right hand to your left shoulder. Notice that the weight shifts more into the left knee. Notice if the hip pops out and hug it in. So we're going to move a little faster, shifting hand to opposite shoulder. And as you do, notice how the weight transitions onto one knee more than the other. And notice if you have a tendency to pop that hip out and try to keep the pelvis as far in neutral as you can. Come back down to the hands. We'll take this up to the next level. I'm going to turn around so you can see my hips. Watch for a second. So we'll hover the knees off the floor. We'll shift weight into one toe as we lift the other foot off the ground. So the block helps us to squeeze into the block, helps to keep the hip in neutral, because if I don't, I'm going to do this. So you can see the difference of my hip popping side to side or staying in neutral to do it. So toes to the floor, squeeze the block, hover the knees an inch or two off the floor, shift the weight into your left toes and lift your right toes off the ground. Squeeze the hips and thighs into the blocks to keep the hips in neutral. Lower toes to the ground. Shift weight into your right toes, lift left heel off the ground. Keep squeezing the block. Keep the hips hugging in and just move side to side. So as you start to transition side to side, do you notice the tendency to pop one of the hips out more? Lower the knees to the floor. First fingers parallel, spread the fingers, tuck the toes under. Lift the hips up and back into downward facing dog. Lift high up onto your toes. Press the tops of the leg bones back. So you feel that ball can move to the back of your socket. Start to squeeze your block and push as if you're rolling the block backwards, inner thighs back. Keep that awareness and start to pull your outer hips back as you lower the heels towards the ground. Keep that awareness of the upper legs being strong. Shift your weight onto your left foot. Keep the outer left hip pulling in as you lift right heel towards your hip. So again, we're coming further away from the floor. Can you still maintain the legs staying squared in the hip socket? Does the left hip stay in? Right foot down. Shift the weight to the right foot. Press the top of the right leg bone back and bend left heel towards your hip. Notice what happens to your right outer hip. Does it pop out? Can you keep the leg bone still? And then bring it down. Lower down onto your knees. Remove your block. Come back to downward facing dog. Shift your weight onto your right leg, left leg. Find that same stability in your left leg. So as if you're pressing your left inner thigh into the block, pull the outer hip back, hover right foot off the floor, knees stay together, kick your right heel towards your hip. So finding the leg bone in the hip socket, lift the right knee. Then as if you're rotating your hip socket on top of the leg bone, leg stays still, hip socket rotates on top of the leg bone. So instead of moving the leg, you're moving the pelvis on top of the leg. Kick right heel towards the hip. Keep pressing the top of the leg bone back. Rotate the top of the pelvis on top of the leg bone as you square the hips. Straighten the right leg back. Bend right knee towards your chest. Step right foot about halfway up. Lower left knee to the ground. Keep left toes tucked under and come upright. So left hip is directly above left knee. Right knee is directly above the heel. Hands to the hips. Bring your hips into neutral. And you can notice your tendency here. Do you feel like the hip pops out on the right? Or do you pop it out to the left? Bring it in neutral. Come onto your right toes. Hands pull down on the pelvis to keep it in neutral. Just try to hover. Right foot off the floor. But can you keep the pelvis stacked on top of your left leg bone? Notice what muscles work, inner and outer thigh, to keep that balance. Bring the foot down. Hands to the floor, step back to downward facing dog. So we're kind of exploring the hip, kind of exploring the leg that is stabilizing us on the floor. So shift the weight on the right foot. Keep your knees together. Kick your left heel towards your hip. As you lift the left foot off the floor, what happens inside the right hip socket? Is the leg or the hip pushing out to the side or dropping in? Lift, left knee up. Keep awareness on the right leg bone. And then start to rotate the pelvis, so the socket, on top of the leg bone without moving the leg. Kick the heel towards the right hip. Keep the leg bone stable. Square the hips. So rotate the pelvis on top of the leg bone again. Draw knee towards chest and step your left foot halfway up your mat. Drop your right knee to the ground. Toes stay tucked under, hands to the hips. Is the leg bone still there? Is the pelvis still in neutral? Come onto your left toes. Keep the right leg strong as you try to lift and maybe balance on your right knee. For just a second. It's hard. Next time you bring the foot down, hands to the floor. Press back into downward facing dog. Tops of the leg bones press back. Inner thighs as if they're squeezing into the block, rolling back. Outer hips hug in and draw back. Slowly walk your hands towards the back of your mat, coming into a forward fold. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Inhale, reach up, stretch up, arms come over your head, gaze up, hands to your heart. Walking all the way to the back of your mat. Shift your weight onto your left leg. Hands to the tops of your hips, lift your right leg forward. Keep hips in neutral. Step right foot down. Shift weight to your right foot. Bring left knee forward. Keep hips hugging in. So as you walk, kind of notice what happens to your hips as you transition weight to the opposite leg. Does one hip try to push out, or do they stay in neutral? Once you come to the front of the mat, bring your feet about hip distance apart. Bend your knees. Sit back, bring your hands to the outsides of your knees. Start to press your knees out into your hands. As you press your knees out into your hands, notice what's going on in the outside of the hips. So you feel kind of the outer hips engage. Then cross your wrist, bring your hands inside the knees, and press in. Can you find kind of this equal pressing in, pressing out to stabilize the leg bones inside the hip socket, and then bring your arms over your ear, beside your ears, chair pulse. Keep drawing inner thighs in, drawing them back, outer hips, pushing out, back. Exhale, hinge forward, forward fold. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, step your left foot back to the back of your mat. Fingers on either side of your right foot. Keep your left hand on the floor. Bring your right hand to the outside of your right knee. Press your right hand or your right knee out into your hand, feeling as you do the top of the leg bone kind of center in the hip socket. Keep that awareness of the outer hip in your right leg and start to imagine a block inside your left thigh. Press in, roll it up. Drop your inner heel, back heel down and in, and lift up into Virabhadrasana 1. So lifting up into Warrior 1. Bring your right hand outside your right knee. Press out. Still feeling that leg bone center as you engage the outer hips. Arms back up. So the warrior poses are that kind of embodiment of that balance between fear and courage, right? So ground down, find the strength within the legs to lift up, and find your inner warrior. Rotate open, coming into warrior 2. So still finding as you open your chest up towards the long edge of your mat. Leg bone still strong in the hip socket. Ground down. Lift through the crown of your head. Tailbone reaches towards the floor. Inhale, straighten the legs. Turn the toes to face the long edge of your mat. Hands to heart. Narrow your stance, so heel toe your feet in a bit. Bend your left knee straight forward. So left knee is tracking over your second and third toe. Notice what happens to your hip. So typically the hip will try and push out. Can you find pressing knee out into your hand, that grounding of the leg bone in your hip socket? Hands to your heart. As you come up, step left foot beside right foot. Then step out, side lunge. Can you find hip drawing into your hip socket? So you're just going back out into that position. Step left foot beside right. And then step back out. Hip bone comes in, knee squares forward. 2 more times. Step it in, step it out. Hip hugs in, so hip goes straight back. Step it in, step it out. Hip comes in, knee squares straight forward. Step it in, step it wide. Both legs straight. Inhale, arms over your head. Roll your inner thighs back, roll your outer hips back, fold forward. Prasarita Padottanasana. Inhale, halfway lift, as if the inner thighs are pressing into the block, as if knees are pressing out, hips pull back. Fold all the way forward. Grab your opposite elbow or hang head towards the floor. Slowly come up, hands on your shoulders. Start to turn your toes towards the front edge of your mat. Come onto your back toes, bend your right knee. Left hand stays on the floor, right hand outside of the knee. Again, press out to find the outer hip, hug in. And then start to twist, belly towards your thigh. Keep the outer awareness of your hip, hugging in and reach right arm up. As if your thighs are squeezing in towards each other, and then lift the back of the left thigh a little bit more. Bring both hands to the floor. Keep your right knee bent, hip hugging in. Step left foot beside right. Roll inner thighs back and in. Outer hips pull back. Lift up, chair pose. Keep weight on your right foot. Lift up halfway as you bring your left knee with you. And then cross. Left leg over right. Press your outer foot into your calf as you sink a little deeper. Right arm comes under left arm. Hands to the palm. Squeeze inner thighs together. Press knees out. So Garudasana, eagle pose. Inhale, lift up, uncross your legs, arms come over your head. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, halfway lift. Firm the inner thighs, firm the outer hips, fold forward. Feet about hip distance apart. Bend your knees, sit back. Hands to the outsides of your knees, press out. Feel the outer hips engage, pull them back. Keep that awareness, cross your wrist, press your knees in, inner thighs engaged. Draw back towards your groin. Arms over your head. So keep that awareness of slightly pressing out with your knees to engage your outer hips. Pressing in with your knees to engage your inner thighs. Exhale, hinge forward. Inhale, halfway lift. Keep your left foot forward as you step, right foot back. Drop your right heel down and in. Keep your right hand on the ground. Take your left hand to the outside of your left knee. Start to press knee out. Feel as you press out with your knee, the top of the leg bone inside the hip socket moves in. As if you're squeezing your inner thighs, but keep that awareness of the outer hip as well. And then rise up to your strong warrior. Maybe taking hand outside of your knee just to make sure the leg bone's grounded in your hip socket. Ground down through your feet. Find that energy, lift up through your legs. And rotate open, Virabhadrasana 2. Warrior 2. Hand to the outside of your knee, press out. Feel the leg bone ground into the hip socket. Notice what's going on in the front of your right hip. Bring it back. Hands out to the side. Tailbone reaches down, crown of the head reaches up. So standing firm, standing strong. Finding that courage within. Arms over the head, toes face the long edge of your mat. Hands to your heart as you walk the feet in just slightly. Going towards the right knee, lunge, side lunge. Hand outside of the knee, press out to feel right hip, hug in. Hands back to the heart, step, feet together. Step out, see if you can find leg bone grounding in, knee forward over your toes. Step back. Just do this a few times. Finding that awareness of your tendency, if it's there, to want to push the hip out, but finding the awareness to keep the hip hugging in. Next time you step out, stay out, straighten the legs. Roll the inner thighs, roll the outer hips, hinge forward. Coming back into Prasarada. Hands to the floor, lift up halfway. As if the block is between the thighs, press in, roll back. Knees pressing out, hug outer hips. In as you draw them back. And then fold forward. Slowing down the breath. Coming back to center. Lift up halfway. Walk your hands towards the front of the mat as you turn your toes. So on your back toes, right hand stays on the floor, left hand comes to the outside of your knee, press out to ground the femur inside the hip socket. Lift your inner right thigh as if both thighs are squeezing into the block. Start to twist, rotating belly towards your left inner thigh. Right hand reaches up. Gaze down. Hands on either side of your left foot. Step right foot up beside left, hip distance apart. Send the hips back. Inner thighs drawing in and back. Outer hips pulling back and in. Arms over your head, chair pose. Shift your awareness to your left foot. Come up slightly as you bring right knee with you. Then cross right thigh over left thigh. Outer edge of your foot presses into your calf. So instead of taking it behind, press. So finding more of that awareness of knees squeezing in, thighs squeezing in. Cross right arm under, or left arm under right, palm in the hand. Pause in eagle. Find your focus. Release. Arms come over your head, rise up. Exhale, hinge forward. Uttanasana. Inhale, halfway lift. Step to the back of your mat, plank pose. Squeeze inner thighs in and up. Outer hips. Hug in and pull back. Exhale, lower down, chaturanga. Inhale, scoot forward and up, up dog. Exhale, press back, down dog. Pause here and breathe. Find awareness in your lower body. As you bring balance and stability into the legs, Notice what happens to the weight in your hands. So we use the strength, power of the legs to create lightness and ease in your upper body. Finding this to be more of a resting posture than a working posture, although we are working. Lift up onto your toes, gaze forward. Bend your knees, step or hop onto the mat. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Inhale, reach up, stretch up, arms over your head, gaze up. Hands to heart center. This time, feet can either be hip distance apart as we did before, or if we're a little bit more challenge of balance, you can bring your feet together. Bend your knees, sit your hips back, moving into chair pose. Fingertips touch the floor behind your heels. Draw inner thighs in and back. Pull outer hips in and back. Arms over your head, chair pose. Pull your lower belly off your thighs. So keep awareness of the work in your legs. So inner thighs, outer hips. As the hips work, notice how much easier chair pose becomes, as if that's ever easy. And bring your hands to your heart. Keep your weight on your right foot. Keep the outer hip pulling back as you kick left heel towards your hip. Knees stay together, squeeze the inner thighs, pull the outer hips back. Hands stay at heart. Start to hinge as you reach left leg back. Start to firm the front of your right thigh, straightening your leg. Inner thigh pressing into the block, outer hip pulling back. So as we move to less supported poses, we're stepping into the fear, the balance, the light and the dark. Step left foot to the back of the mat. Drop the heel to the floor. Come up, Virabhadrasana 1. Keep the awareness. The legs, inner thighs. Pushing in, rolling back. Outer hips, hugging in, drawing back. Rotate open. Virabhadrasana 2. Ground down. Ground through the feet. Tailbone reaching down, crown of the head reaching up. Outer right hip, hugging in. Knee tracking the toes. Left thigh pushing back into the hip socket. Inhale, straighten the legs. Toes point forward. Hands to your heart. Bring your hands to your hips this time. Walk your feet a little closer. We're going to do that same lunge, side lunge. So coming into your left hip, knee pressing forward, hip hugging in. This time, as we transition, we're going to shift our awareness to the right leg and come up into a balanced pose. So lift left knee forward. Go back. Left hip draws straight back. Shift forward. Hug outer right hip in. So it may take a few times to find kind of that balance of creating stability in the outer hip from side to side. It's the power of the outer hip often that has to create, especially on the side that you're balancing on, that power. Next time you come down, straighten left leg. Reach the arms over the head. Hands behind the back. Inner thighs roll in, outer hips pull back, halfway down. Inner thighs push in, roll back, outer hips, hug in, draw back, fold all the way forward. Let the head hang. Shoulders move down the back as arms fall towards the floor. Slow down the breath. Release hands to the floor. Come up halfway. Turn the toes to face the long edge of the mat. Left hand stays on the floor. Right hip hugs in as inner thighs squeeze in and lift up. Reach. Right hand up towards the sky. Bring the right hand down to the floor. Bring your hands to your chest. As you lift hands off the floor, find the strength to power the legs. Keep the right knee bent. Lift left knee towards your chest. Pause. Cross legs. This time perhaps wrap left foot behind right calf. Arms out to the side and then bring right arm under left. Squeeze inner thighs, draw them back. Push knees out and then crunch down. Keep the awareness of what the thighs and hips are doing to maintain this balance. Lift up, bring the arms over the head, ground the feet into the floor. Firm the inner thighs, firm the outer hips, fold forward. Grab the opposite elbow, hang. Release the hands. Feet either hip distance apart or toes touch. Inhale, use the strength of the legs to rise up, arms up. Exhale, step back, chair pose. Inner thighs, squeezing in, drawing back towards your pubic bone. Outer hips hugging in, drawing back. Hands to your heart. Shift your awareness to your left leg, especially the left hip. Hug it in, kick, right heel towards your hip. Try to keep left hip hugging in. Start to tilt forward as you reach. Right leg back. Keep pulling outer left hip in and back as you straighten left leg. So the strength of the leg, you can feel the leg bone, the pelvis balancing on that ball. Step right foot to the back of the mat, heel down and in. Find your warrior. Keep that inner strength. Facing any challenges head on. And these positions, you might start to really feel as if the hips are working too hard and that tendency to want to let it go. Can you sit with it a little bit longer as we open up into Virabhadrasana 2? Sensing where both leg bones are in the hip socket. Find that centration. And arms come over your head as you straighten the legs. Heel toe the feet slightly narrower. Hands to your hips. This gives you the sense of your pelvis staying as much in neutral as you can. Shift to your right. Knee presses forward, tracking second and third toe. Right hip draws back instead of pushing out. So keeping it in line with your knee. Then shift to your left as you bring right knee forward. And then try this a few times. So finding awareness of the outer hips, which in my mind and my body, it's usually that outer hip that's my darkness. Like I'm unaware of it. So I have to kind of move into seeing if I can see the darkness so I can find the balance, that that awareness that will balance me side to side. Next time you open, stay open. Straighten both legs. Widen your stance slightly. Hands come behind your back. Push fist down as you lift your chest. Inner thighs squeeze in, pull back. Outer hips hug in, draw back. Fold forward halfway. Notice how the strength of the legs make it easier to hold here. And then keep them engaged as you hinge all the way forward. Shoulder blades down your back, neck long. Arms falling towards the floor. Release hands to the floor. Walk your hands towards the front of your mat as you bring your hands on either side of your left foot. Hug left hip in. Squeeze inner thighs, lift them up. Right hand stays on the floor, left hand, head, reach up towards the sky. Hands on either side of your left foot. Keep the strength of the legs to bring your hands to your heart, lifting up off your left thigh. Inner thighs, outer hips. Keep your left knee bent as you shift forward. Bring your right knee towards your chest. Notice the tendency of your left hip to pop out and then cross. Right thigh over left. Maybe hooking the foot behind your thigh. Either way, squeeze your inner thighs, draw thighs back. Push your knees out, draw hips back, cross. Left arm under right. And then crunch forward. And find inner balance, inner strength, inner courage to stay grounded, facing fears instead of leaving them behind, wondering what would have been. Slowly lift up. Feet plant, arms come over the head. Exhale, hinge forward, fold. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, step or hop, back of the mat. Keep the legs strong to keep your plank strong as you lower down chaturanga. Inhale, scoot forward and up dog. Exhale, press back, down dog. So, standing on one leg can be not necessarily scary, but we often let our mind go to places of where we second guess ourselves and our own abilities, the strength, the courage to stand strong. So a lot of this work we've done in Chakra 1, it's a lot of balance poses. It's finding our own inner strength, but also our own weaknesses, like where in our body do we need to find more stability so that we can stay grounded and upright in less stable situations. Slowly lower your knees to the floor. Feet together, knees wide, send your hips back towards your heels, forehead to the floor, and rest in child's pose. So it's when we move into these places that we normally avoid. So oftentimes when we think of hips being tight, of tension and stress in our body, we want to move to what's easy, what's comfortable to us. And that's oftentimes, a nice gentle stretch, which is awesome, which is great. But sometimes it's the darkness, the unknown, that's going to create the most stability that will create more mobility. So when we work on stabilizing the joint rather than just stretching the joint, we might find that we create more space in our body. Inhale, shift forward to tabletop. Cross your ankles, sit your hips behind your heels, and release your hips to the floor. Heels in line with your sit bones. Go ahead and take a block and place it between your thighs again. So start to squeeze the block between your thighs, hands down beside your hips. Snuggle your shoulder blades closer to your spine. Tuck your chin towards your throat, so neck long, collarbones stay wide. Bottom of the rib cage stays down and in. Start to squeeze the block again. Shifting weight to your inner foot. Press down through your feet to lift your hips up into bridge. Clasp your hands behind your hips, press the fist into the floor. As you press down, bring your shoulder blades closer to your spine. Chin stays tucked, neck stays long. Find the block between your thighs, press in. To get more lift, find your outer hip, so knees press out slightly. Press down through the outer edge of your feet, maybe lifting the hips higher. Breathe in and out through your nose, deep into your lungs. So the body, our work on the mat is a reflection of our lives. Sometimes we avoid what we're scared of. We fear a lot. Maybe we fear that we will fail. Maybe we fear that we will succeed. And really, what's scarier? Sometimes success and the thought of having to continue can be just as fearful as failure. Release your hands, release your hips to the floor. Keep the block where it is, unroll your shoulders, and just pause. It takes courage to look into the light. Just as there is no light without darkness, there is no courage without fear. So fear, although it is the shadow side, which sometimes we think is the negative side of first chakra, without fear, without that stressor, we have no reason to move beyond it. We have no reason to look towards the courage within to move forward. One more bridge pose. Hands down beside your hips. Snuggle your shoulders closer together. This time, go ahead and take the block out. But keep the awareness of what the thighs were doing with the block there. Press to the inner edge of your foot. Lift the hips up. You can either keep your hands on the floor, or if you prefer, you can use the fist. Lift the hips higher, finding the outer hips, drawing them down towards the floor to lift the hips higher. So we have that engagement of the glutes. Sometimes I think of the glutes as the dark side because oftentimes we've kind of let them go dark. We've switched them off and relied so heavily on either the inner thighs or the front of the thighs to do all our work. So we have to look behind us to find what might lift us a little higher. Lower the hips. Unroll the shoulders. Step your feet wide, mat distance apart. And drop your knees side to side. And bring your feet together or hip distance apart. Press your feet into the floor. Lift your hips about an inch and move them to the left. Straighten your right leg flat to the floor. Bend left knee towards your right shoulder. Use your right hand to draw your left knee towards the right side of your mat. You can stay in this position, or if you want, kick your right heel towards your right hip and then reach behind with your left hand to grab the front of your right foot. Allow your head to either fall towards your left shoulder or towards your right shoulder. So deep breaths. Moving deep within the lungs to find expansion within. And finding that ease of the exhale as you soften and relax the diaphragm. Release your right foot if you've caught that. Release the left knee, roll back to center. Both feet to the floor, shift your hips slightly to the right, straighten your left leg flat to the ground. Draw right knee towards your left shoulder, left hand guides your right knee towards the left side of your mat. You can stay here or kick. Left heel towards your hip, grabbing the front of your left foot with your right hand. Allow your head to either fall towards your right shoulder or towards your left shoulder. Finding the breath coming deep into your lungs. Soft expansion with the inhale. And even softer release with the exhale. Release your left foot. Roll the hips back to center. Reposition the hips in center. Draw the knees towards the chest. Making circles as we did at the beginning of the class. Moving first in one direction. And then the other direction. Just noticing how now the leg bones move within the sockets. Is there more ease? Is there more movement as we've spent moving into those opposing forces of the abductors and adductors? So they work together. And when there is balance, when there is that equinox between these two sides, we find more ease, more balance, more stability. And whenever you are ready, you can either straighten your legs long to the ground, or if you prefer, soles of the feet together, allowing the knees to open wide into Supta Baddha Konasana. We did a lot of hip release. So you may find that this pose and this final resting posture is quite restful. But please know that what we're looking for in our final resting posture is ease. So if you still feel that there is kind of this battle between the two sides and you still feel tension and you're not allowed to fully relax in this pose, please make the decision to release into Shavasana with legs long. Once you are here, bring one hand to your lower belly, right above your pubic bone, and the other hand to the bottom of your rib cage, right where your diaphragm is. As we find this final resting posture, this final space for calm and ease. Notice the balance between the breath, between your lower belly and your upper belly, where the diaphragm resides. Returning to those words from Marianne Williamson. It's a final reminder. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others. And in this period of lots of fear, especially in this past year, what else could we want than to show our own power, our own strength, our own fearlessness, in order to create that same response in others? If you are in Supta Baddha Konasana, go ahead and straighten the legs long to the mat. Reach the arms over the head, stretch through heels or toes, finding inner body length. As you exhale, bend your knees and roll onto your side body. Using your hands and your arms, press yourself up into a seated position. And slowly bring your hands to heart center, feeling your light side and your dark side connect at heart center. Without the darkness, there is no light. Without fear, there is no courage. So moving into the space of what is unknown allows us to move forward into the light and discovery. Thank you so much for your time. The divine in me honors the divine fearlessness inside of each of you. Namaste.